Hi guys, William Morris here, and today we're going to take a look at the RME Fireface UFX Plus. So I've had this interface for about a month now, so I've kind of been getting to grips with everything and just trying to learn the new TotalMix software and also the new interface itself. This has been like a pretty big upgrade for me in terms of price and performance and everything. I've gone from a Focusrite 18i20, the first generation, so a great kind of value interface. Lots of features and stuff, but I just thought it was time to kind of step up. I was mainly sort of chasing improved kind of latency performance. I work with a lot of virtual instruments and do some pretty sort of heavy track count kind of projects. So everyone was saying that the RME drivers and stuff were just great and really stable, and so that was kind of one of my main reasons for upgrading. I was also looking for a little bit of future proofing, and as the UFX Plus comes with USB 3 and Thunderbolt connectors, I thought that would kind of take me into the future a little bit. Obviously, one of the main selling points of the unit is that it's got such a huge kind of I/O count with all the MADI and ADAT connectors and stuff like that. This isn't actually something that is kind of useful to me, but I was kind of just going on the connection for the interface and the fact that I wanted to go RME. And the smaller interfaces they didn't quite have enough I/O sort of built into the units for me straight away without getting external preamps and the like. So I'll just give you a really quick tour of the front of the interface. I can't really show you the back because it's kind of all plugged in at the minute around the back of my desk. But here's basically the front panel as it is. So obviously power switch on the right, and going from right to left you have the headphone adjustments. You have a sort of LCD display here which can show all your input and output levels. You got some setup knobs there for doing your mic gains on the front, and also some controls for setup and the duo rec functions. You got a big volume knob, some state LEDs where you can show the host, MIDI in and out, not performance but sort of status, so when I hit like a MIDI key you can kind of see the in MIDI function kind of light up there, and obviously the same with the ADAT and stuff as well. The memory port there, the USB, is for the duo rec, so you can do direct recording to the interface basically, so it can kind of work standalone without a computer and you can still record to it. Some extra MIDI I/O on the front, headphone output jacks, and then here's the mic pre's on the front. I'm going into mic pre 1 at the minute. You can see obviously the signal coming in. I've got 48 volt phantom power, and obviously the TRS lights up if you have TRS inputted. So yeah, that's basically it for the front, guys. Pretty simple really. In the end, I actually opted for getting the ARC USB controller as well, which I think if you're going to go for this interface is kind of highly recommended. There's a lot of functionality I really wish was actually on the front panel, and it's kind of been included in the ARC USB controller. I'm just going to show you that here. So there we go. The lights might appear like they're flashing, but they're not. It's just I think the refresh rate on the recorder. So I have it set up with mute for the main monitors. Speaker B would switch between speakers A and B, but I have it set to return the monitor level to a set kind of reference level. So if I turn the monitor volume up or down here, this will then switch it back to my kind of reference level. And you can see it comes out on the panel here. So I'll turn the volume up and down, and then I hit reference and it goes back to my reference level. I got dim, which you can set in the settings to control a monitor dim, so it's basically a minus however many dB you want dimmed down, which is really handy, something I use a lot. We have put everything in mono, which is nice and handy. Check your mixes in mono. Volume for headphones, which is obviously on the front as well, but it's just nice to have it here. And then I've set these as to control my gain preamps for the 4 preamps on the front there. So all you do with any of these is the knob controls everything once it's selected. So you'd hit gain and then gain up and down. I won't do that at the minute because my voice is on that one. But yeah, basically that's just the controls for that, and you can do all the same with the rest of them. So yeah, I mean, I'd say it's kind of almost a necessity really, and on an interface of this price, it would have been super cool to kind of include it or bundle it in some way, but it's about 120 quid extra. So okay, so if we switch back to the software now, I can't show you the back panel in real life, but here it is as they kind of do. So obviously just really quickly go through this. There's power, I/O, MIDI in and out, which I have plugged into my kind of master MIDI controller keyboard. You've got 2 lots of ADAT in and out, USB 3, Thunderbolt 2. This is the remote that the RME ARC controller gazed into. So you've got your word clock here, MADI I/O, and your digital ins and outs here. All your analog line outputs, monitor outputs, and all your line inputs. So that's the kind of hardware side covered. Let's jump into the software, which is RME's TotalMix UFX. Basically, this is the software that comes with all RME products. My overall impression is that it's really powerful, really configurable. I haven't really found an option that isn't included yet. Some things that I want to change. It is a little bit of a learning curve coming from other stuff, especially if you've had like maybe quite a simple sort of stripped down kind of interface before. But I think once you get the hang of it, everything's sort of reasonably intuitive. So just basically, because I mean, you could talk about this for hours. There's so much kind of to do in it and stuff. But this is your hardware input section. So I have, just at the moment, I have the Kemper left and right set up on analog 1 and 2. I have the Kemper DI on 3, and then these go onto the mic pre's on the front. So mic 9 is actually the first preamp on the front of the interface, and that's obviously the one that my voice is coming in on at the minute. The software playback section is here, so these are going to be all your outputs from your DAW. Obviously, most of you are just going to have analog 1 and 2 out as a kind of default, which will be the stereo out from your DAW. And then these are the physical hardware outputs down at the bottom here. So I just have through analog ones here and the ADAT ones. A lot of the channels here I've hidden because they're not in use at the minute, so that's all the MADI channels and some of the other ADAT channels as well. You can hide and show whatever you want in the interface, which is quite nice to clean it up sort of thing. So each channel basically has a little wrench icon where you can go into extra settings. So you got 48 volts phantom power, stereo, instrument input, obviously your gain level. There's an auto set gain, which I haven't really looked into yet, but I believe it just kind of sets it to a sort of predetermined level that you want. You got your effect sends, you got a little EQ section. So at the moment I just have a bit of a low cut to take off the very bottom rumble for everything. And then dynamic section, so you've got a compressor in here. All the effects are built into the interface itself, and you have a little indicator on the front panel to tell you how much the DSP you're using. You have a kind of master effects section over here where you can have reverb and echo, and obviously you can use the effect sends to kind of send that over to the effects in there. The way you kind of set up a mix in here is kind of cool as well. You basically set up select the output you want, and then just turn the faders up and down for that one. So I do most things on either headphones or the main monitor outputs, and I've got slightly different setups for each. So obviously on my main monitors, I don't bother sending out the mic I'm recording to it. The other main part of the software, if you just hit X, is you can go into the sort of control matrix, so the routing matrix. So you can see all the ins and outs, hardware ins and outs, software playback, and a sort of master section down at the bottom. So you can pretty much route anything to anything. It's super flexible. And obviously the more kind of channels you use, the more this is going to be sort of applicable. I'm still getting a few things set up and worked in at the minute, so it's kind of basic what I've got set up at the minute, but this is just yeah, a sort of starting point. And then you can hit M, takes you back to the main mix control here. There's a lot of options in the software as well. If I can go into preferences here, just give you an idea of the kind of things you can do. It really is very flexible. And it's kind of nice that they have the same interface for all their products. It kind of just unifies everything, and you know, it's not like they have to rewrite the software every time they bring out something new. So here, yeah, some kind of mixer settings, device settings. Channel layout is the one you can use to kind of hide and show all the channels that you want to. So you can see everything with the X's I've kind of got hidden off, which is generally just the MADI stuff that I'm not using at the moment. And you can also set up the ARC control in here, which is really handy. So you can see I've got the ARC USB settings in here, so I've got all my gain controls mapped, and you can basically choose whatever you want. It's super flexible, and you can also have a foot switch as well if you want to set that up for you know, record enable and stuff like that as well. I believe the ARC USB also is going to come in handy for the Duo Rec stuff for the standalone recording. So that's the main kind of side of the software. The other sort of accompanying bit is the MADI face kind of settings here. So this is everything, I guess, more for your DAW. So you can set sample rate. Sorry, not sample rate. So you can set your buffer settings here. All your clocking and sample rate stuff down here as well. And then you've got your output options and input options here. I'll just show you the about section. It's really just the driver versions and stuff, just to show you what I'm running on in the minute. This is latest as of sort of first quarter of 2018. So obviously this is a Thunderbolt and USB 3 interface. At the moment, I'm running over USB 3. I was having some problems with Thunderbolt. Basically the problem was that I was getting intermittent sort of bit crusher distorted type audio under Windows audio, not on the ASIO side. So everything in DAW playback was fine. It was just the Windows side. I've got a short clip that I'm going to put up now, which is kind of a demonstration of the sound I was getting. So this is a bit strange. I'm not really sure why it was happening. I've still not kind of found a fix for it. It doesn't seem to be happening on USB 3 at the moment, so I'm going to kind of get everything stable on USB 3, get everything working, and then go back to Thunderbolt. And I'll do an update to this video when I do that, just to kind of wrap up how the Thunderbolt side panned out. Unfortunately on USB 3, I've also had a fair few problems, I think mainly related to the fact that it seems quite picky on the USB 3 chipset that you connect with. In this MADI face settings here, which is the USB kind of panel, you do get this USB diagnosis tool, which basically tells you if there's any errors. This should read at the top as it is 000, and this is just a little counter here that tells you how long you've been using the tool. But basically, yeah, this should read 000 to show that there's no USB kind of chipset errors happening. RME do state in the manual that there's certain USB chipsets to stay away from. I think the big one is AS Media, which is actually kind of one of the more popular ones for motherboard manufacturers on Windows. So the first USB 3 port I tried it on was actually an Intel based chipset on my motherboard. Just to give you a bit of background, this is my motherboard here, the Asus X99A-2, and this has AS Media USB 3 ports. It also has Intel USB 3 ports, and So I thought, well, I'll use the Intel ones because the Intel ones are meant to be supported. There shouldn't be any problems there. But on the Intel chipset on the motherboard, I was getting a lot of the USB 3 errors in the diagnosis thing here. So I do have a picture and a screenshot that I took from the first lot of errors, and as you can see, there's a ton of errors coming in just in a like 2-minute kind of sample. And basically all these errors that you see manifest as kind of dropouts in audio. So even in Windows audio, every time one of those errors happens, you can hear a slight sort of cutout in the sound. So then I switched over to using the USB 3 ports on my Thunderbolt add-in card. This is basically an add-in card that gives you Thunderbolt 3 and another USB 3 port over an Asus motherboard. It's basically what it looks like, so I just got one of these. The Thunderbolt port is the one that I was using initially, and I had some issues on that with the bit crusher sound. So I then went to start using the USB 3.1 port in here. And so far, this has been the best one for me. I now don't get any of the USB errors. This is my updated one here. So here you can see I've been running it for 20 minutes and I've got sort of 0 errors on the diagnosis tool there. The strange thing is with this though, is that it's actually an Intel based chipset on the add-in card. So it should really be the same chipset as the one on the motherboard itself. So it's definitely something to look out for if you're on Windows, just to kind of really be aware that the different chipsets for USB 3 at least are probably going to give you fairly different performance. And then maybe if you have a motherboard that only has, say, AS Media, or I guess even for me, some Intel based chipsets, that you might encounter some problems there. I think you can get around it by buying like a PCI Express based kind of add-in card that has different USB 3 ports on, but just something to be aware of, because obviously everyone kind of expects to sort of buy it and it work kind of straight away. But obviously I've had at least a couple of weeks worth of back and forth with support on these kind of issues. So as I say, I will do an update to this video once I've got the Thunderbolt back up and working, but at the minute I just needed to kind of crack on and get the USB 3 sorted and running and everything kind of in place. So as I said at the start, one of my main reasons for upgrading was to try and get some better low latency performance in Cubase and kind of increased just stability in general. So I tried to do some low latency testing on my own, basically using a little app called Centrance, which is a kind of round trip latency audio tester. And if we jump in here, I have some comparisons that I kind of did between the two. Just make that a bit bigger. So hopefully you guys can see that. So yeah, basically I was just trying to do some testing between my old Focusrite and the new RME. These are the results over Thunderbolt, although USB 3 is, I'd say, close to that. Not exactly the same. I think the Thunderbolt is definitely slightly better, but should give you an indication. So just to explain these results, everything on this one is at 44.1 sample rate, and what it does is basically measure the round trip latency. It was quite hard to get them to the same buffer size because the Focusrite in the buffer settings doesn't have it as samples. It's done as milliseconds, so it's actually just the closest I could get it. So you basically see that the RME at the very lowest settings is very, very low latency, down at 32 samples. This is basically the measurement results, so 2.59 milliseconds. The lowest I could actually go on the Focusrite was 45 samples, which was their 1 millisecond setting, and in comparison that's 5.56 versus the 2.59, so close to double down at those low latencies. So I would say that the low latency performance is a lot better, and I'm definitely kind of pleased with that. But the kind of main thing for me is that the improvement at higher buffer settings is a lot less. So as you can see the comparison here, this is just the closest I could get it in regard to the sample settings here. But as you can see, there's 25 on the Focusrite and just 24 on the RME under Thunderbolt. So it definitely doesn't scale that kind of performance improvement. So for the start of a project and recording, and if all you're doing is tracking, then the Thunderbolt RME is going to be amazing. It's really kind of super low latency. But kind of when you get further into a project, it's really not kind of giving you the same sort of performance improvements. So I don't have any screenshots of the USB 3 ones, but we can jump into Cubase and just give you an idea. I know it's not a kind of fair comparison, but just give you an idea of kind of the latency settings you might be able to get just using the inbuilt Cubase's input and output latency reporter thing. The odd thing with this one is normally in Cubase, obviously you'd hit Control Panel and that brings up the MADI face thing here. At the minute I have it on 256, which is generally what I spend most of my time in a project, because I tend to use a lot of VSTs and it gets kind of quite heavy sessions quite quickly. But normally what you do is you change the sample rate. So say I go up to the max. Oh, by the way, this is kind of what you can achieve, or the kind of sets you're given for USB 3. I think they're slightly different for Thunderbolt. It's been like a couple of weeks since I put it on, but I think you can go up higher in samples, so you can double again. And I'm pretty sure there's a 16 sample setting for Thunderbolt as well for the very lowest latency as well. But yeah, so say I change to the 2048 here. So you'd hit OK and you'd expect that the changes would be reflected in the panel here. But kind of annoyingly, you have to switch out the driver and then go back into it to see the changes reflected. So this is the very top, 43 in, 43 out. It's obviously a huge buffer setting there that you'd use for kind of pretty heavy mix stage of the project. Let's go down to 512 and take off the driver, take on the driver. So it's 11 in, 11 out. Let's go down to 128, see what that is. See, so down at 128, it's 3 in, 3 out, which is about 7, just under 7 round trip, reported by Cubase, obviously. So take those results with a pinch of salt, but obviously really pretty good. I mean, that's kind of in the range of not really being able to hear the latency at 128. We'll just go down to the lowest now, so on 32. And so that's going to be your lowest on USB 3. 1 in, 1.8 out. So again, super low. I would say as well that I did a few comparisons before when I had the Focusrite as well. So I was bringing up some pretty heavy projects, setting them both on the same buffer settings, and the RME definitely had the edge. It was kind of, I mean, I was playing back at 256 and there was projects that were clicking and popping all over the place on the Focusrite, and then switching to the RME, there was maybe just a couple of tiny ones kind of thing. So there was definitely a marked kind of difference there in the overall stability and sort of performance of it. So obviously I'm really hoping to get this running under Thunderbolt, and obviously I'll report back if there's any kind of more problems with that, and hopefully I can get it up and running, and then I'll do some more kind of testing just to see if there's much kind of improvement over USB 3. From what I've seen on, there's a site called doorbench.com which kind of does low latency performance testing, and they seem to suggest through some, really kind of properly good, more scientific than me testing videos and stuff like that, that you can achieve slightly better performance with the Thunderbolt versus USB 3, and also better USB 3 performance than USB 2. So I hope you guys found this video useful. If there's anyone that's looking to get the UFX Plus, I mean, overall, I'm actually really happy. I mean, I've definitely had some problems in the setup, but I think now that I'm kind of running stably and everything's, working as it should, I'm definitely pleased with the increased performance there. In my case, I was obviously going from a sort of reasonably budget interface up to something, costing several times more. So it's probably not a completely fair comparison, but I know there's maybe some other people out there that are thinking of going from a similar sort of interface and taking a bit of a leap up to something else. Whether those performance increases are going to be worth it to you, obviously is going to be a personal thing. Also, if you're happy with a smaller channel count and maybe a few kind of less features, there's definitely some other interfaces you could look at as well that use Thunderbolt. My kind of problem I found that especially on mainly on Windows really, is looking for a Thunderbolt interface. A lot of them have a pretty large list of caveats about what they will and won't work with. The main issues being that a lot of them are Thunderbolt 2 based, but most motherboards are now Thunderbolt 3. So you do need at least maybe an add-in card for your motherboard like me, or you need an adapter that goes from Thunderbolt 3 to 2. Okay guys, so I'm going to leave it there. If you have any further questions or comments on this that you want to ask me, just put them in the comment section below. Thanks for watching, and I'll do an update video when I can to look at the Thunderbolt side of things.